The Bitter Taste of Ambition. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be captivated by The Bitter Taste of Ambition, a tale set in the fiercely competitive world of London's high-end culinary scene. Meet Antoine Dubois, a celebrated yet arrogant chef whose life takes an unexpected turn. Drawn into a wager with his longtime rival Jean-Pierre, Antoine is challenged to marry Enli, a sharp-tongued food critic known for her unflattering assessments. What begins as a calculated move for Antoine to gain wealth and recognition soon evolves into a complex dance of secrets and unexpected connection. Enli, however, has her own agenda tied to a painful past linked to Antoine's success. As they navigate their unconventional marriage, they discover hidden depths in each other, leading to a surprising bond. But the shadows of the past loom large, threatening their newfound happiness. Stay tuned for a story of ambition, rivalry, and the transformative power of love. Don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing narratives. Chapter 1. The First Cut, the First Lie. The shard of glass, an almost invisible sliver, lay glinting on the pristine white tablecloth. It was nestled beside a meticulously folded napkin, a silent sentinel to the hushed chaos that had just erupted. Antoine Dubois, typically an immovable force in his kitchen, stood frozen, his eyes, usually blazing with an almost terrifying intensity, now wide with a flicker of something akin to panic. The air in l'éclat, his revered London restaurant, usually thick with the rich aroma of truffles and reduction sauces, was now acrid with the sharp tang of failure. A single, perfectly seared scallop, the star of his signature dish, lay mangled on the floor, its delicate flesh marred by a cascade of glistening ice cubes. It was not merely a culinary disaster, it was a personal affront, a jagged tear in the carefully woven fabric of his perfection. This wasn't just any night. This was the night for the final tasting for the coveted Golden Ladle Award, an accolade whispered about in hushed tones across the culinary world, a prize Antoine had relentlessly pursued for over a decade. His reputation, forged in the crucible of countless Michelin stars and unyielding dedication, hung precariously on the precipice of this singular fateful evening. He'd built l'éclat from the ground up, brick by meticulously sourced ingredient, sweat by unforgiving hour. Its vaulted ceilings, adorned with discreet shimmering chandeliers, echoed with the silent testimony of his unyielding ambition. The idiot whispers among the elite diners were always the same. Antoine Dubois is a genius, but a solitary one. Indeed, Antoine was a maestro of flavor, a culinary architect whose hands could coax magic from the humblest of ingredients. Yet, beneath the crisp white toque and the unblemished chef's jacket, he was a fortress, built of 1,000 defenses. His movements, usually fluid and precise as a surgeon's, now felt clumsy. His breath caught in his throat. The kitchen, usually a symphony of controlled clatter and sharp commands, was now a tableau of stunned silence. His sous chefs, their faces a mixture of concern and unspoken fear, dared not move. They knew the unpredictable tempest that brewed beneath their master's calm exterior. The fragment of glass, now magnified in Antoine's mind's eye, pulsed with a malevolent light. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was no accident. A subtle tremor ran through him, a tremor born not of fear, but of a cold, calculated rage. Someone had sabotaged him. But who? And why now, on the eve of his greatest triumph? His gaze swept across the marble countertops, the polished copper pots, the gleaming knives, each an extension of his will. He had cultivated an environment of absolute control, where every element was meticulously placed, every procedure rigorously followed. The idea of an intruder, a saboteur within his hallowed walls, was anathema, a festering wound in his meticulously crafted reality. Antoine Dubois was a man sculpted by ambition, honed by fierce competition. His past was a tapestry woven with threads of relentless work, bitter rivalries, and countless sacrifices. He had left behind a humble, almost impoverished, upbringing in rural France, trading the scent of damp earth for the electrifying hum of professional kitchens. His parents, simple farmers, had always instilled in him the value of hard work, but also a quiet dignity he found often lacking in the cutthroat world of haute cuisine. He carried the scars of betrayals, of mentors who had stolen his ideas, of peers who had tried to undermine him. Each setback had only hardened his resolve, transforming him into the unyielding titan he was today. He wore his perfection like a suit of armor, impenetrable and gleaming, but it also cast a long, lonely shadow. He had no true friends, only colleagues, subordinates, and a legion of admiring but distant fans. His only companion, it seemed, was his relentless pursuit of culinary glory. As the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, a soft clatter from the dining room broke the spell. The soft murmur of sophisticated chatter, the clinking of champagne flutes, the distant strains of a live jazz quartet. All were a cruel reminder of the world outside, the world waiting for his masterpiece. The Golden Ladle judges, a panel of notoriously discerning critics, were seated, their palates primed, their pens poised. Among them, he knew, sat Jean-Pierre, his eternal rival, a man whose smile held the warmth of a winter sun and the sharp edge of a razor. Jean-Pierre, with his seemingly effortless charm and uncanny ability to anticipate Antoine's every move, was a persistent thorn in his side, a shadow that stretched across his achievements. Antoine's jaw tightened. He would not be defeated, not by a shard of glass, not by a sabotaged dish, and certainly not by Jean-Pierre. He snapped back to life, his voice, usually a low rumble, now a whip-crack command. "Clean this up, immediately." His sous chef sprang into action, their movements now infused with a renewed sense of urgency. Antoine's mind, a whirlwind of calculated precision, raced through alternative plans. He had backups, contingencies for every conceivable disaster. But this felt different. This felt personal. Just then, a figure entered the kitchen, a silhouette against the warm glow of the dining room. It was Pierre, his maitre d', his face etched with a mix of concern and polite impatience. "Chef, the judges are asking for the next course." Antoine nodded, his eyes still fixed on the disappearing fragments of glass. He glanced at the clock. Time was a luxury he didn't have. He needed to improvise, to create something even more extraordinary, to silence the whispers of doubt before they could even begin. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, a dangerous thrill that always accompanied the brink of disaster. This was where he thrived, in the crucible of impossible situations. But as he turned to his station, his gaze caught something in the reflection of a polished stainless steel pot, a fleeting image of a woman framed by the archway leading to the dining room, her face obscured by shadows, but her posture radiating a curious blend of anticipation and something else. It was too quick, too fleeting to be certain, but it left an unsettling tremor in his usually unshakable composure. Was it Enley, the notoriously enigmatic food critic, known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, who often observed from the periphery, her judgments swift and often brutal? She was a woman who held power of life and death over culinary careers, yet was often dismissed for her unassuming appearance. Antoine had always found her perplexing, a woman who seemed to see beyond the glossy facade into the very soul of a dish, and perhaps the chef behind it. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his own reflection, a mask of grim determination. He pushed the unsettling feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. He would not allow this setback to define him. He would not allow anyone to diminish his talent, his ambition, his rightful place at the pinnacle of the culinary world. But as he plunged his hands into a bowl of shimmering, pristine prawns, a chilling thought pricked at his mind. Was this simply a random act of sabotage, or was it the first move in a much larger, more intricate game? The scent of burning sugar, a subtle, almost imperceptible hint wafted from the corner of the kitchen, momentarily overriding the rich aroma of his ingredients. It was an anomaly, a discordant note in his carefully orchestrated symphony of smells. Antoine paused, his senses on high alert. No one was caramelizing sugar. A shiver, colder than any blast from the walk-in freezer, ran down his spine. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the glass was merely the opening act. The true drama, he suspected, was just beginning, and he, the king of his culinary kingdom, felt a profound, unsettling tremor of vulnerability for the very first time. He would win the golden ladle, yes, but at what cost? And what bitter taste would linger long after the sweetness of victory had faded? The dazzling crescendo of clinking crystal and effervescent laughter from the dining room seemed to mock the chilling silence that had momentarily gripped Antoine's kitchen. The scent of that phantom burning sugar, a faint metallic sweetness that hinted at something sinister, still clung to the air, a ghost of an unseen presence. He had regained his composure, his usual mask of steely command firmly back in place, but beneath it, a nascent unease coiled. The sabotage scallop, now swept away, was a stark reminder that his kingdom, once impregnable, now had a breach. He worked with a furious intensity, his movements a blur of practiced grace. The pristine prawns, a canvas of pink and white, yielded, to his touch, transformed into a new starter. A delicate ceviche, its vibrant flavors a defiant rebuttal to the earlier mishap. Each slice of lime, each sprinkle of fresh cilantro, was a testament to his unyielding spirit. This wasn't merely cooking, it was an act of defiance, a silent declaration of war against an unseen enemy. As the first plates of the improvised ceviche swept out to the dining room, carried by the ever-efficient Pierre, Antoine finally allowed himself a moment to survey the battleground. The culprit, he knew, was still among them. His eyes, keen and analytical, scanned his team. Their faces were a mixture of exhaustion and relief, their movements still edged with lingering tension. No telltale flicker of guilt, no telltale twitch. They were his soldiers, loyal and disciplined. But loyalty, Antoine knew, was a fragile thing, easily corrupted by ambition or fear. Then, his gaze fell upon Jean-Pierre, seated at the judge's table. Jean-Pierre, whose perfectly tailored suit seemed to absorb all light, whose silver hair gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers, a halo of calculated sophistication. He was laughing, a rich, resonant sound that somehow failed to reach. His eyes, which were fixed, not on the exquisite ceviche before him, but directly on Antoine. A smile, slow and deliberate, stretched across Jean-Pierre's lips. It was a predator's smile, a silent acknowledgment of the chaos he suspected, perhaps even orchestrated. Jean-Pierre, or Jean-Pierre the Serpent, as Antoine privately called him, was everything Antoine was not, charming, charismatic, and effortlessly connected. Their rivalry stretched back to their formative years in Parisian culinary schools, a bitter dance of competition that had defined both their careers. While Antoine thrived in the quiet solitude of his kitchen, pouring his soul into every dish, Jean-Pierre was a master of self-promotion, a public figure whose culinary talent, while undeniable, was often overshadowed by his shrewd business acumen and undeniable charisma. He owned a chain of high-end bistros across Europe, each a testament to his ability to blend culinary artistry with popular appeal, a concept Antoine disdained as vulgar. Their last public clash had been at the Taste of Europe Festival 3 years prior, where Jean-Pierre had narrowly edged out Antoine for the top prize, a victory that still rankled deep within Antoine's proud heart. Jean-Pierre had presented a flamboyant, deconstructed bouillabaisse, a theatrical spectacle that had captivated the judges, while Antoine's deeply traditional, exquisitely refined consommé, though technically superior, had been deemed too subtle for the modern palate. The memory of that slight, that casual dismissal of his craft, still burned. Now, Jean-Pierre raised his champagne flute, a silent toast that felt less like camaraderie and more like a challenge thrown across a vast, invisible chasm. His lips moved, and Antoine, despite the distance, almost heard the words, "Your move, Antoine." A ripple of anticipation swept through the dining room as the judges, having savored the ceviche, prepared for the main course. Antoine's attention, however, was drawn to a table in the quieter corner of the room, near the large arched window overlooking the glittering cityscape. There, amidst the polished silverware and sparkling crystal, sat Enli. She was an anomaly in this world of polished veneers and extravagant displays. Unlike the impeccably coiffed socialites and the preening gastronomes, Enli seemed almost plain. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her dress a practical, unassuming dark fabric that seemed to shrink into the background. Her glasses, thick-rimmed and slightly askew, magnified her eyes, which, even from a distance, seemed to absorb every detail with an almost unnerving intensity. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, certainly not in the way Antoine's past flings had been, elegant, decorative women who understood the unspoken rules of society. Enli was different. She was a quiet storm, a discerning mind housed in an unassuming exterior. Her critiques were legendary for their brutal honesty, their surgical precision. She didn't mince words, nor did she care for reputation or celebrity. She stripped away the fanfare, the expensive ingredients, the gilded presentation, and went straight to the heart of the dish, its soul, its authenticity, its truth. She was the oracle of the culinary world, and her pronouncements could either elevate a restaurant to dizzying heights or send it plummeting into obscurity. Antoine, in his arrogance, had always dismissed her personal appearance, finding it oddly at odds with the incisive power of her words. He had never truly understood the depth of her insight, only the impact of her judgment. As the main course, a perfectly roasted guinea fowl with black truffle juice, began to leave the kitchen, Antoine watched Enli from the corner of his eye. She wasn't taking notes with the feverish intensity of the other critics. Instead, she sat almost perfectly still, her head slightly tilted, her gaze sweeping the room, then settling on his kitchen. It was as if she wasn't just tasting the food, but sensing the very atmosphere, dissecting the unspoken emotions that permeated his establishment. There was an unsettling calmness about her, a quiet intelligence that transcended mere intellect. Suddenly, Jean-Pierre rose from his seat, a practiced smile plastered on his face. He made his way directly towards Enli's table, his movements fluid and confident. A murmur rippled through the dining room as heads turned. Jean-Pierre, the showman, never missed an opportunity to make an entrance, to command attention. He leaned down, his voice a low, theatrical purr that carried surprisingly well across the hushed room. "My dear Enli," he began, his voice laced with mock concern. "I trust Chef Dubois' creativity is to your liking tonight?" His eyes, however, were still fixed on Antoine, a challenge hanging in the air. Enli, who had been studying her plate with an almost meditative focus, slowly looked up. Her eyes, magnified behind the thick lenses, met Jean-Pierre's with an unnerving directness. There was no warmth, no flicker of amusement, only a quiet, unwavering gaze. "Creativity, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, is often born of necessity," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the polite murmurs of the room like a precisely sharpened blade. "And necessity, as we both know, can be a most demanding mistress." Jean-Pierre's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a fleeting chip in his polished facade. He recovered quickly, a practiced chuckle escaping his lips. "Ah, always so philosophical, Enli. But tell me, truly does l'éclat still shine as brightly as its name suggests? Or has the glow dimmed?" Antoine felt a surge of cold fury. This was it, the public attack, the subtle poisoning of the well. Jean-Pierre was not merely questioning his food, he was questioning his very essence, his resilience. Enli took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, her gaze unwavering as it shifted from Jean-Pierre to Antoine, who stood silhouetted in the kitchen doorway, a silent sentinel of his culinary domain. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "Monsieur Jean-Pierre," Enli began, her voice gaining a surprising resonance. "The true test of a chef, as of any artist, is not merely in the perfection of their craft, but in their ability to innovate, to adapt, to rise above adversity." She paused, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "And sometimes, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, adversity is self-inflicted, or perhaps inflicted by others. The last words, though spoken softly, landed with the force of a hammer blow. Jean-Pierre's charming smile evaporated completely, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, a hint of something darker in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but Enley continued, her gaze now fixed entirely on him. "I propose a challenge, Monsieur Jean-Pierre," she said, her voice now clear and unwavering, cutting through the hushed anticipation of the room. "A true test of skill, of ingenuity, of resilience. A culinary duel, if you will." A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. A duel! In this refined, polite society, such a public challenge was unheard of, audacious, almost scandalous. Antoine felt a jolt go through him. A duel with Jean-Pierre? The thought ignited a dangerous spark within him, a thirst for definitive victory that overshadowed all caution. Jean-Pierre, ever the opportunist, quickly regained his composure. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face, far more chilling than his previous warmth. A duel, Enley? How stimulating. And what, pray tell, would be the stakes of such a grand spectacle? Enley leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet, somehow, every word seemed to resonate through the silent room, reaching Antoine's ears with startling clarity. The stakes, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, would be the very essence of your ambition. You, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, will publicly renounce your claim to the golden ladle if you lose. And Chef Dubois, her eyes, sharp and unwavering, found Antoine's across the glittering expanse of the dining room. Will do the same. Antoine's breath hitched. The golden ladle, the culmination of his life's work. To risk it all on a duel. His mind reeled. It was madness, pure, unadulterated madness, yet a fierce, almost primal urge to accept, to silence Jean-Pierre once and for all, pulsed through him. The bitter taste of Jean-Pierre's veiled accusations, the lingering phantom of the sabotaged scallop, pushed him towards the precipice. But then, Enley's next words, delivered with a detached, almost chilling precision, twisted the knife deeper. And the terms of this duel, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, are simple. Both of you will create a single dish. One ingredient chosen by me. And the judge will be your future wife. A stunned silence descended upon the room, so profound that the delicate clinking of a dropped fork echoed like a cannon shot. Antoine felt as if the very air had been sucked from his lungs. His future wife? He was a solitary man, a culinary hermit. The idea of a wife, let alone one who would judge his magnum opus, was preposterous, an absurd, cruel joke. His gaze snapped to Enley, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning. Her eyes behind the thick lenses held a peculiar glint, a silent, knowing challenge. She wasn't just a critic, she was an architect, a puppeteer, pulling strings he hadn't even known existed. Jean-Pierre, however, ever the master of the unexpected, let out a booming laugh, a sound that sliced through the suffocating tension. A wife, you say, Enley? My dear, you are full of surprises. And who, pray tell, would be the fortunate woman to witness such a culinary battle? He looked around the room, his eyes twinkling with a predatory amusement, then landed on Antoine. Enley's voice, calm and precise, cut through his laughter. The judge, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, will be me, for I, Monsieur Dubois, will be your wife. The words hung in the air, suspended like a fragile glass sculpture about to shatter. Antoine's world tilted on its axis. Enley. Her? The unassuming critic, the quiet observer, the woman he had so arrogantly dismissed as merely a discerning palate, was now declaring herself his bride, his judge, his fate. The bitter taste of ambition, once a motivating force, now coated his tongue with the chilling tang of an unforeseen, treacherous game. He had walked into a trap, set not by Jean-Pierre alone, but by the silent, calculating woman with the discerning eyes. The first cut, had been the glass in his scallop. This, he realized with a sickening lurch, was the deepest cut of all. The game had begun, and he was nothing more than a pawn, albeit a very proud one, in a chess match he hadn't even known he was playing. The ensuing silence in l'éclat was not merely quiet. It was a physical entity, pressing down on every soul, heavy with the weight of Henley's audacious declaration. Antoine Dubois felt it most keenly, a sudden, dizzying drop in the pit of his stomach. His future wife? Her? The thought was an absurdity, a grotesque parody of the grand, romantic pronouncements he'd always disdained. His life was a meticulously constructed edifice of culinary excellence, devoid of the messy entanglements of personal relationships. A wife, particularly this wife, was a foreign, unwelcome variable in his perfectly balanced equation. Across the room, Jean-Pierre's initial shock morphed into a slow, deliberate smile, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He grasped Henley's hand, a gesture of almost theatrical gallantry. "Henley, my dear, you never cease to amaze. A culinary duel with such intimate stakes. I confess, even I am intrigued." His gaze, however, flickered back to Antoine, a silent, knowing challenge. A stroke of genius, or perhaps sheer madness? Antoine's mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of disbelief and burning anger. Madness, yes, but whose? Henley's, for daring to utter such a preposterous claim? Or Jean-Pierre's, for so readily embracing the farce? And what of his own? Had his pride, his unshakable belief in his own invincibility, blinded him to the deeper currents at play? He saw the terms of the wager now, laid bare with chilling clarity. A public duel, orchestrated by the most influential critic in London with his most hated rival. The prize, the golden ladle, the ultimate validation of his life's work. The cost, his meticulously guarded solitude, his very independence, shackled to a woman he barely knew, a woman whose discerning gaze held the power to shatter his world. The thought of marriage, especially one born of such bizarre circumstances, was repugnant. It was a cage, exquisitely gilded, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Yet beneath the wave of revulsion, a more insidious thought began to stir. He was Antoine Dubois. He had conquered every challenge, overcome every obstacle. This was just another, albeit more unconventional, hurdle. And Henley? She was a critic, a judge. In his arrogant estimation, she was a tool, a means to an end. Her unassuming appearance, her lack of conventional beauty, made her, in his eyes, a malleable instrument in this twisted game. He believed he could charm her, manipulate her, bend her will to his own. He would win the golden ladle, expose Jean-Pierre's underhanded tactics, and then, well, then he would simply find a way to gracefully dissolve this absurd arrangement. He was a master of his destiny, and no critic, however powerful, would dictate his life. His pride, a towering edifice built upon years of sacrifice and unrelenting self-discipline, soared dangerously high. It was a pride that often bordered on hubris, a belief that his talent alone was enough to overcome any adversity. He had faced down hostile critics, tyrannical head chefs, and crippling financial woes. This was merely a new ingredient in a recipe he was determined to master. He would turn Henley into his pawn, a temporary inconvenience, a stepping stone to his ultimate triumph. The very idea of using a woman in such a way, however, did not prick his conscience. Ambition had long since cauterized such tender sensitivities. Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre watched Antoine with an almost palpable glee. His mind, a labyrinth of Machiavellian schemes, was already several steps ahead. He had orchestrated this entire charade, or so he believed. The glass in the scallop, a subtle yet devastating opening act, was his handiwork. He had observed Antoine for years, noting his obsessive pursuit of perfection, his profound loneliness. He knew Antoine's greatest strength was also his fatal flaw, his overweening pride. Jean-Pierre's own ambition was a different beast altogether. It was not merely about culinary accolades, but about power, influence, and the sheer pleasure of outmaneuvering his rivals. He craved the spotlight, the adulation, the recognition that came with being not just a great chef, but a brilliant strategist. He had seen Enli's rising star, her unique blend of sharp intellect and unflinching honesty. He also knew of her elusive, almost ghost-like past, whispers of a tragedy, a connection to the very foundations of the culinary world that few understood. He had meticulously cultivated a relationship with her, a subtle dance of shared insights, and carefully placed compliments, laying the groundwork for this very moment. He had sensed Enli's quiet resentment, a simmering indignation beneath her composed exterior. She was often dismissed, underestimated, her profound knowledge of food overlooked in favor of more superficial qualities. Jean-Pierre, with his keen eye for human weakness, had seen this and exploited it. He had planted the seed, subtly suggesting the idea of a public challenge, a chance to shake up the staid culinary establishment. And when Enli, with her quiet fire, had proposed the marriage twist, Jean-Pierre had recognized its perverse brilliance. It would not only humiliate Antoine, forcing him into a grotesque mockery of intimacy, but it would also elevate Enli's status, making her an indispensable player in the game. And in doing so, she would, however unknowingly, serve Jean-Pierre's ultimate purpose. He envisioned Antoine, the aloof, untouchable chef, trapped in a forced domesticity, his perfection slowly crumbling under the weight of an unwanted partnership. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a delicate ballet of manipulation. Jean-Pierre believed he understood Enli's motivations, a desire for recognition, perhaps a quiet vengeance against a world that had undervalued her. He saw her as an intelligent but ultimately predictable instrument, a pawn in his grand design to finally and irrevocably dethrone Antoine Dubois. The clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation slowly resumed in the dining room, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. The air was charged with a new, thrilling tension, a collective anticipation of the spectacle to come. The Golden Ladle competition, once a state affair, had been transformed into a theatrical drama, a high-stakes gamble for reputation, legacy, and perhaps something far more personal. Antoine, still reeling from the shock, felt a wave of cold determination wash over him. He would play this game. He would accept the challenge not because he wanted a wife, but because he refused to be beaten. He would prove Jean-Pierre wrong. He would prove Enli wrong. He would reclaim his undisputed throne. He would, in his own mind, turn this ridiculous proposition into another testament to his unwavering dominance. Antoine listened, captivated despite himself. This was not the dry, academic critique he was accustomed to. This was a glimpse into a hidden wellspring of emotion, a personal narrative woven into the very fabric of her critical mind. He had a dream, Enli continued, her voice now a low, almost mournful hum. To open a restaurant, a place where food was celebrated for its intrinsic beauty, not its market value. He poured his life into it, every ounce of his talent, his meager savings. It was a humble place, unlike Leclerc, but it was brimming with heart. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her hand as she finally met Antoine's gaze again. He was on the cusp of a breakthrough, about to gain recognition when it all collapsed. A series of misfortunes, a crippling debt, whispers of professional sabotage. He lost everything, his restaurant, his reputation, and ultimately, his life. The last words were delivered with a quiet finality, yet the impact was profound. Antoine felt a cold wave wash over him. Loss, ruin, sabotage. The echoes of his own past, of the ruthless competition he had endured, resonated deeply within him. And this mentor, Antoine asked, his voice barely a whisper. Who was he? Enli's eyes, behind the unyielding glass, were now pools of ancient sorrow. His name was Émile Fournier. The name hung in the air like a discordant note. Antoine's breath hitched. Émile Fournier. The name was like a phantom. A memory so deeply buried it had almost ceased to exist. Émile Fournier. The legendary, almost mythical figure in French culinary circles, whose sudden, tragic demise had sent shockwaves through the industry almost 2 decades ago. A whisper had always lingered. a persistent rumor of foul play, of a rival's desperate attempt to eliminate a burgeoning talent. Antoine had heard the whispers, dismissed them as mere gossip, too focused on his own climb to heed the cautionary tales. A cold dread seeped into Antoine's bones. He remembered Émile Fournier's work, a fleeting, almost forgotten memory from his early days in Paris, when he was just a budding chef, hungry for knowledge. Émile's dishes had been revolutionary, simple yet profound, imbued with an honesty that was rare even then. And Antoine remembered another detail, a crucial one, that had been whispered behind closed kitchen doors. Émile Fournier had been poised to challenge a rising star, a chef whose meteoric ascent had begun around the same time Émile's career had tragically ended. A chef who had then gone on to dominate the London culinary scene, eventually opening a restaurant named L'Éclat. The realization hit Antoine with the force of a physical blow. The connection, the mysterious, painful link between Enlil's past and his own career. It wasn't just a general sense of justice, it was a deeply personal vendetta. Émile Fournier had been Jean-Pierre's greatest threat at the time, and Antoine, in his relentless pursuit of his own ambition, had benefited, perhaps unknowingly, from Émile's downfall. He looked at Enlil, no longer seeing a plain critic, but a woman forged in the crucible of loss, driven by a quiet, unyielding purpose. She wasn't a pawn. She was the hand that moved the pieces, a silent, meticulous avenger. The entire duel, the absurd marriage, was not just about the golden ladle. It was about something far larger, far more personal. It was about rectifying a past injustice, about exposing the rot beneath the glittering veneer of the culinary world. And Antoine, the undisputed king of his domain, was now inextricably bound to her quest. A bitter irony coated his tongue. He, the architect of his own destiny, had been drawn into a game he barely understood by a woman he had so arrogantly underestimated. The true cost of ambition, he realized, was not just the sacrifices made, but the hidden debts, the shadows of the past that eventually caught up. The golden ladle now felt like a mere trinket, insignificant in the face of the revelation that had just shattered his carefully constructed world. Enlil rose, her gaze unwavering, her voice a quiet, unsettling prophecy. "The stage is set, Chef Dubois. The world awaits your performance. But remember, the most profound dishes are often those that reveal the most bitter truths." She walked towards the door, her silhouette framed against the receding light of the London skyline, leaving Antoine alone in the vast, echoing silence of his restaurant. The scent of burnt sugar, now heavy and cloying, seemed to fill the room, a chilling promise of the reckoning to come. He was not just fighting for a culinary award. He was fighting for his legacy, his conscience, and perhaps for a truth he had long buried. The bitter taste of ambition had never been so acutely felt or so fraught with unspoken danger. The duel, he knew, was not just about cooking. It was about confronting the ghosts of a past he had never truly acknowledged. And Enlil, his reluctant bride, was the key to unlocking them all. The world, it seemed, had been holding its breath, waiting for the curtain to rise on the most bizarre culinary drama in London's history. News of the Golden Ladle duel and its astonishing marital wager had exploded across every news outlet, splashed across the front pages of tabloids, and discussed in hushed, excited tones in the hallowed halls of culinary academies. For Antoine Dubois, a man who had meticulously curated his public image as one of unwavering perfection and monastic devotion to his craft, the sudden glare of this unwanted spotlight was a torment. His restaurant, L'Éclat, was besieged by reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers, their questions a relentless barrage against the fortress of his solitude. But the show, as they say, must go on. And so, the fiancé, Antoine Dubois, and his equally bewildered fiancée, Enlil, embarked on their public charade. Their first date was a carefully orchestrated affair at a discreet upscale gallery opening, far from the bustling heart of L'Éclat. Antoine chose the venue, a stark, minimalist space adorned with abstract sculptures, hoping its cold rationality would temper the awkwardness of their forced intimacy. He arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His usual aura of formidable aloofness softened ever so slightly into an approximation of a man embarking on a romantic courtship. He had spent hours in front of his bathroom mirror practicing smiles that conveyed warmth without genuine feeling, nods that suggested interest without true engagement. It was a performance, and Antoine Dubois, the master of precision, intended to deliver a flawless one. When Henley arrived, Antoine felt a familiar, unsettling jolt. She was dressed in a simple, dark blue shift dress, practical shoes, and her ever-present thick-rimmed glasses. She wore no makeup, no jewelry beyond a delicate silver chain around her neck. In a room shimmering with designer gowns and flashing diamonds, she was a quiet island of understated reality. Her appearance was a stark contrast to the elegant, decorative women Antoine usually consorted with, women who moved with the grace of gazelles and whose laughter tinkled like wind chimes. Henley, with her quiet intelligence and almost academic air, felt like a foreign language he was suddenly forced to speak. "Mademoiselle Henley," Antoine began, forcing a smile that felt alien on his lips. "You look, understated." He mentally winced. It was not the smooth, charming opening he had rehearsed. His words felt clumsy, like a dull knife against a delicate ingredient. Henley's gaze, calm and observant as always, settled on him. "And you, Chef Dubois, look as though you are about to prepare for a very important service." There was no malice in her tone, only a dry observation that sliced through his pretense with unnerving accuracy. It was as if she could see the carefully constructed facade, the layers of practiced charm he was attempting to deploy. Antoine felt a blush creep up his neck, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his awkward teenage years. He recovered quickly, offering his arm with a theatrical flourish he immediately regretted. "Shall we appreciate the art?" As they moved through the gallery, Antoine launched into his well-rehearsed act. He spoke of the purity of form in abstract sculpture, drawing parallels to the precise beauty of haute cuisine. He gestured expansively, his voice modulated to convey thoughtfulness and cultured appreciation. He sprinkled in anecdotes about his travels, about rare ingredients, about the philosophy behind his most celebrated dishes. He was accustomed to women hanging on his every word, captivated by his success and his undeniable talent. He expected Henley to be no different, to be swept away by the sheer force of his presence. Henley, however, remained impassive. She listened, her head slightly tilted, her eyes moving from the artwork to him and back again. She offered no effusive compliments, no gushing expressions of awe. Her responses were concise, often a single word or a thoughtful hum. When he expounded on the delicate balance of flavors in a complex sauce, she merely nodded, then remarked, "A delicate balance indeed, though sometimes, chef, true genius lies in simplicity, in allowing a single ingredient to speak for itself, unburdened by excessive layering." Her words were a quiet critique, delivered with such disarming politeness that Antoine almost missed their sharp edge. It was a subtle dismantling of his carefully constructed narrative, a gentle reminder that she saw through his performance. He found himself increasingly flustered, his usual confidence eroding under her calm, unwavering scrutiny. It was like trying to perform a complex culinary technique for a seasoned master who understood every minute flaw in his execution. He tried a different tack, one he considered foolproof. "Flattery. Your critiques, Henley, are truly unparalleled. Your ability to dissect a dish, to articulate its very essence, it is a rare gift." He laid it on thick, hoping to appeal to her ego. Henley turned to him, a faint, almost imperceptible wryness touching her lips. "Compliments, Chef Dubois, are like rich desserts, pleasant, but often lacking in true nourishment if served too frequently or without substance." Antoine felt a surge of frustration. She was impenetrable. His usual arsenal of charm and charisma, honed over years of dazzling patrons and captivating critics, seemed utterly useless against her quiet reserve. It was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. The game, he realized, was far more complex than he had anticipated. He was used to being the hunter. Now he felt strangely like the hunted. As the evening progressed, Antoine found himself subtly shifting his strategy. He stopped trying to impress her, and instead began to observe her. He noticed the way her eyes lingered on a particular painting, a stark landscape that conveyed a profound sense of solitude. He saw the slight tilt of her head when she listened, a sign of deep concentration. He noticed that when she spoke, however briefly, her words were always insightful, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Their conversations were not romantic or even particularly engaging in the traditional sense. They were more like intellectual sparring matches, a quiet exchange of observations and thinly veiled challenges. Antoine, in spite of himself, found a strange fascination taking root. She was not the easy conquest he had envisioned, not the malleable pawn. She was an opponent worthy of his intellect, a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. He also found himself recalling her words from the previous night, the haunting story of Émile Fournier. The more he observed Henri, the more he sensed the profound sorrow that lay beneath her composed exterior. It was a grief that seemed woven into her very being, a quiet undercurrent to her sharp intellect. He, who had always suppressed his own emotions, found himself strangely drawn to the depth of hers. He wondered about her true motivations, the exact nature of her connection to Fournier, and how it intertwined with his own past, a past he had so diligently buried beneath layers of success. As the gallery began to empty, and the low hum of conversation dwindled, Antoine decided to make one last desperate attempt at his performance. He steered her towards a secluded corner, the soft glow of a spotlight illuminating a striking, almost melancholic portrait. He lowered his voice, infusing it with a practiced sincerity he hoped would finally break through her defenses. "Henri," he began, his voice a soft murmur, This unexpected turn of events, it is unusual to say the least." He paused, letting his gaze linger on her, trying to convey a vulnerability he didn't truly feel. "But perhaps there is something to be found in this unforeseen connection, a new flavor, an unexpected pairing?" He leaned in slightly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of a thaw. "I admit, I am a man dedicated to my craft, perhaps to a fault, but even a chef, Mademoiselle Henri, can be open to new ingredients, new possibilities." He offered his most charming, most hopeful smile, the one that had melted countless hearts. Henri met his gaze, her eyes unblinking behind the glasses. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Antoine felt a familiar dread creep into his stomach. He braced himself for another dismissive remark, another intellectual counterpoint. But then, a subtle shift. The corners of her lips, almost imperceptibly, tilted upwards. It wasn't a smile of warmth or even amusement, but rather a tiny, knowing flicker. "Indeed, Chef Dubois," she finally said, her voice still quiet, but with a new, almost playful lilt. "The culinary world, like life itself, is full of unexpected ingredients. But sometimes," she added, her gaze sharpening, "the most potent ones are those you least expect, and they can either elevate a dish to a masterpiece or leave a very bitter taste." She stepped back, the faint smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Antoine to ponder the double meaning of her words. She hadn't been charmed, not truly. She had simply acknowledged his performance and then subtly turned the tables on him. He had tried to manipulate her, to use her as a pawn, but he was beginning to suspect that she was not only aware of his intentions, but was silently, subtly, orchestrating her own game. As they stepped out into the cool London night, the city lights a dazzling blur, Antoine felt a strange mix of exasperation and grudging admiration. He had entered this engagement, believing he held all the cards that he could easily navigate this absurd charade. But Henri, with her quiet intelligence and unsettling directness, had managed to dismantle his carefully constructed assumptions without raising her voice. She was not the conduit he had envisioned. She was a force, enigmatic and unpredictable. The paparazzi, a familiar swarm, descended upon them as they exited the gallery. Antoine, ever the professional, instinctively put an arm around Enli's waist, pulling her closer, flashing a practiced, confident smile for the cameras. He felt her stiffen for a moment, then, surprisingly, she leaned into him slightly, a brief, almost imperceptible pressure. It was a gesture of reluctant cooperation, a silent acknowledgement of their shared public role. As the flashes exploded, around them, Antoine caught a glimpse of Jean-Pierre's face in the crowd, a shadow lurking at the edge of the light. His rival's expression was unreadable, a fleeting mix of triumph and something that might have been surprise, perhaps even a touch of envy. Antoine held Enli closer, maintaining the facade. He was a master of performance, and he would play his part. But as he looked out at the sea of flashing lights, the roar of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real performance was yet to begin. He had thought he was luring Enli into his web. But as he looked down at her unassuming profile, sensing the quiet strength beneath her composure, he began to wonder if, perhaps, he was the one being subtly, expertly drawn into hers. The bitter taste of ambition had never been so complex, so tantalizingly unpredictable. The masquerade had truly begun, and its ending was anyone's guess. The air in L'Éclat, once thick with the scent of ambition and the clatter of controlled chaos, now hummed with a different kind of energy. The golden ladle duel was upon them. The grand dining room had been transformed into a culinary arena, tables pushed aside to make way for two gleaming kitchen stations, facing each other like gladiators in a coliseum. Cameras flashed relentlessly, reporters scribbled furiously, and the elite of London's culinary scene, including the ever-present preening figure of Jean-Pierre, filled every seat, their gazes riveted on the two chefs. Antoine, standing before his immaculate workstation, felt a strange cocktail of apprehension and exhilaration. He had spent the last weeks in a forced proximity with Enli, a courtship that had been a masterclass in performative intimacy. He had played the doting fiancé, taking her to exclusive events, whispering sweet nothings he didn't feel, all while meticulously observing her, trying to decipher the enigma that was Enli. He discovered, to his reluctant surprise, that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a razor-sharp wit and an unwavering passion for the authentic heart of cuisine, a passion that mirrored his own, albeit with a purity he had long forgotten. His initial contempt for her plainness had slowly eroded, replaced by a grudging admiration for her intellect. He'd even found himself, on rare occasions, forgetting the charade, engaging in genuine, spirited debates about the philosophy of food, about the subtle alchemy of ingredients. He'd seen glimpses of her vulnerability, a shadow in her eyes when the name Émile Fournier was inadvertently mentioned, a quiet intensity that hinted at a deep, unhealed wound. He knew now that her involvement was far more than a simple bid for recognition. It was a crusade for justice. Across the arena, Jean-Pierre was a vision of theatrical confidence. He preened for the cameras, his movements flamboyant, his smile radiating a practiced charm. He was cooking with panache, his every gesture designed to captivate the audience. Antoine watched him, a cold, calculated fury simmering beneath his calm facade. He knew Jean-Pierre was playing to the crowd, relying on spectacle rather than substance. But Antoine was no longer just fighting for a trophy, he was fighting for the truth. The single ingredient chosen by Enli for the duel was deceptively simple: an heirloom tomato, not the pristine, uniformly red tomatoes of commercial cultivation, but a gnarled, multi-hued specimen, bursting with imperfections and a rich, earthy aroma. It was a silent challenge, a demand for authenticity. Antoine began his work with a meticulous focus. He envisioned a dish that would honor the tomato's inherent flavor, transforming it without obscuring its soul. His hands, usually so confident, now moved with a new sense of purpose, a quiet reverence for the ingredient. He thought of Émile Fournier, of the honest, unadorned beauty of his cooking. He was no longer just Antoine Dubois, the perfectionist. He was a conduit, a vessel for a purer form of culinary artistry. As he worked, a sudden piercing voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Monsieur Jean-Pierre, a word, if you please." The voice belonged to an elderly, impeccably dressed woman, with eyes that glittered with an almost fierce intelligence. She was Madame Valerie, a reclusive but legendary figure in the Parisian culinary world, known for her sharp memory and even sharper tongue. Her presence was a surprise, an unexpected element in the carefully choreographed drama. Jean-Pierre, caught off guard, forced a charming smile. "Madame Valerie, a pleasure as always. You grace us with your presence." Madame Valerie, however, ignored his pleasantries. Her gaze, cold and unwavering, bore into him. "I heard whispers, Monsieur Jean-Pierre, whispers of a certain accident that befell a promising young chef, Émile Fournier, many years ago. A chef whose visionary restaurant was due to open, just weeks before yours. A restaurant that threatened to eclipse your burgeoning empire." A hush fell over the room, the collective breath of the audience held in suspense. Jean-Pierre's smile faltered, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "Madame Valerie, I assure you, those are malicious rumors." "Are they?" Madame Valerie interjected, her voice rising, echoing through the now silent room. "Because I distinctly recall a conversation years ago with a former associate of yours, a man who, on his deathbed, confessed to me his role in a calculated campaign to discredit Émile Fournier. Whispers planted among suppliers, false health inspectors, even a fabricated report of contaminated ingredients that crippled his finances and destroyed his reputation." Her eyes, now blazing with righteous indignation, fixed on Jean-Pierre. "And he spoke of a certain chef who provided the funds, the resources for this regrettable series of events." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The air crackled with shock. Jean-Pierre stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The elegant facade he had meticulously cultivated for years began to crack, revealing the calculating monster beneath. Enli, standing at her own small judging table, had been watching with quiet intensity. Now she stepped forward, her voice, though soft, carrying an undeniable authority that commanded the room. "Madame Valerie speaks the truth." Her voice was laced with a raw, undeniable pain. "Émile Fournier was not just a promising chef, he was my father." The revelation struck Antoine like a physical blow. Her father, the hidden connection, the depth of her pain, the quiet strength that had always baffled him, now made chilling sense. This was not just about justice. It was about filial love, about reclaiming a shattered legacy. The duel, the marriage, it was all a meticulously constructed trap, designed not for the golden ladle, but for the truth. Jean-Pierre's face contorted, a mask of fury replacing his shock. "This is a fabrication, a malicious lie. You, manipulative little—" He lunged forward, but was quickly restrained by security guards. Enli ignored him, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the audience, then finally settling on Antoine. Her eyes, behind the thick lenses, held a complex mix of sorrow and a silent plea. "The sabotage in your kitchen tonight, Chef Dubois, was simply a reflection of the larger, darker machinations that have plagued this industry for too long. My father was a casualty of that ambition, and I, for too long, have been a silent witness." The full weight of Enli's plan, her courage, her quiet dedication, crashed down on Antoine. She hadn't been a pawn. She had been the strategist, the unseen hand, meticulously setting the stage for this very moment. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own ambition, that he had failed to see the quiet storm brewing right beside him. With the truth unveiled, the golden ladle competition itself seemed to fade into insignificance. The real drama was the unmasking of Jean-Pierre, the shattering of his carefully constructed reputation. Reporters swarmed Jean-Pierre, their questions now laced with accusations. The golden ladle judges, their faces grim, exchanged troubled glances. Antoine, however, turned his attention back to his heirloom tomato. The immediate chaos around him dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. He no longer cooked for a trophy or for validation or even for revenge. He cooked for a deeper truth, for the legacy of a man he barely knew, and for the quiet strength of the woman standing beside him. He sliced, he seasoned, he tasted, his movements imbued with a newfound purity of intent. He crafted a simple yet exquisitely balanced tomato consommé, clear as a mountain spring, its flavor bursting with the essence of the sun-ripened fruit, a testament to unadorned perfection. When it was time for the final judgment, the atmosphere was electric. Jean-Pierre, his face pale and contorted, his carefully constructed career in ruins, was dragged away by security, his public humiliation complete. Enli, as per the terms of the wager, was the sole judge. She approached Antoine's station, her gaze meeting his. There was no longer any pretense between them, only a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgment of the crucible they had just passed through. She tasted his consommé, her eyes closing for a moment, a subtle tremor passing through her. When she opened them, they were luminous, reflecting a complex tapestry of emotions. Then she turned to the audience, her voice clear and strong. Tonight, we have witnessed more than a culinary duel. We have witnessed the unveiling of truth and the triumph of integrity. Chef Antoine Dubois' dish, it speaks of honesty, of a deep respect for the ingredient, and of a spirit that has truly evolved. She looked at Antoine, a soft, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. It is a taste of redemption, chef, a taste of a future where ambition is tempered by compassion, and perfection is found not in flawlessness but in truth. The applause that erupted was not for the golden ladle, but for the raw, human drama that had unfolded, for the courage of a woman who had dared to speak truth to power, and for a chef who had, in the crucible of unexpected adversity, found his true north. Antoine, standing amidst the fading cheers, felt a profound shift within him. The bitter taste of ambition, which had once defined him, now had a new, sweeter aftertaste. It was the taste of humility, of empathy, and of a burgeoning, fragile hope. He had achieved culinary greatness, yes, but he had also found something far more precious. A connection, a purpose beyond himself, and perhaps the faint, shimmering promise of a love he never knew he needed. He looked at Enli, who, despite the momentousness of the evening, still carried herself with quiet dignity. His gaze held hers, a silent, powerful acknowledgment of their shared journey. The golden ladle might have been the catalyst, but the real prize was the profound transformation within him, sparked by the unassuming woman who had dared to be his judge, his truth-teller, and ultimately his salvation. The duel was over, the battle won, but the greatest adventure, the true forging of a partnership, had just begun. The future of L'Éclat and of Antoine Dubois now held a flavor he had never anticipated, the sweet, lingering taste of a life finally seasoned with truth and shared humanity. Dear esteemed audience, as the echoes of the bitter taste of ambition fade, we are left with a powerful reminder that the pursuit of greatness often comes with unforeseen costs. Antoine Dubois' journey, from a solitary chef driven by fierce ambition to a man willing to embrace vulnerability and truth, offers us invaluable lessons. This story teaches us that true success isn't solely measured by accolades or public recognition, but by the integrity of our actions and the purity of our hearts. It reminds us that unbridled ambition, when unchecked, can lead to isolation and moral compromise, but that redemption is always possible through humility and a willingness to confront our past. Enli, the unassuming critic, embodies the power of quiet strength and unwavering dedication to justice, showing us that even the most overlooked individuals can wield profound influence and bring about transformative change. Ultimately, the bitter taste of ambition is a testament to the healing power of truth and the profound impact of unexpected connections that force us to look beyond superficial appearances. It challenges us to reflect on our own ambitions. Are they leading us to a bitter end or to a richer, more authentic life? We hope this journey through the world of haute cuisine and hidden secrets has resonated with you. What did you find most surprising about Antoine's transformation? What was your favorite moment in Enlil's quiet quest for justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Thank you for listening.